Hey, what's up everybody? Michael here and welcome back to PlayStation Homebrew News. Well, it seems like we're getting close to auto jailbreaking the PlayStation 5 3.00 through 5.50. Now we also had a big update to the PS5 WebKit Autoloader, a public beta of Prospero Manager, PS4 debugging support for firmware 13.00, and much more. So let's go ahead and jump straight into our first news story. So we can see over here from Jordy that they have shared an early build for testing automatic jailbreaking through Redis on PS5 firmware 3.00 through 5.50. So the build is intended to run the jailbreak automatically when the console boots, and it can also auto-load ELF files from the PS5 Autoloader directory. The screenshot shows how to stop the automatic behavior. You can rename the supplied Redis configuration file and place it in the system application directory through FTP using mtrw access. This is described as a super beta early release, so I would expect issues while people begin testing different firmware versions and setups. If this proves reliable, then this will feel much closer to a persistent homebrew environment versus running a web browser or an application like we do today after we start up the console. The PS5 WebKit Autoloader from its POK installs and hosts the WebKit entry point, then waits for the payload environment to become available. Version 0.4.0 expands its firmware coverage in two directions. Firmware 7.00 through 8.60 now uses the POOPS path, while firmware 12.02 through 12.70 uses P2JB. If the ELF loader is already running, the autoloader skips repeating the exploit and moves straight to the next step. It also polls for readiness instead of depending on one fixed delay. That sounds like a small implementation detail, but it should make the tool behave better across consoles that do not finish the setup at exactly the same speed. ShadowMountPlus is used to mount game images and manage content from external storage on a Homebrew-enabled PlayStation 5. Version 1.7 Alpha 11 is mainly about making that process more reliable. So this new USB notifications are a nice practical addition. When a drive is connected or removed, the console can report its capacity, available space, block size, and the number of games found during the scan. The release also addresses race conditions during image mounting and unmounting. So in plain language, it is trying to prevent the application from reusing a device before the previous operation is actually finished. There are fixes for the application database, image cache, and canceling an AMPR update as well. So this is not a very flashy release, but again, I love having more stability for ShadowMountPlus. OrbisNet is a different kind of PS4 homebrew project. It creates a private peer-to-peer online layer for two or more jailbroken consoles without using Sony's PlayStation Network services. The open beta already has a social overlay, game indentations, and a way to search for public games. Human Fall Flat, Resident Evil 6, and Minecraft are among the games working so far. One technical detail matters when players connect. OrbisNet checks the eboot.bin file and hashes it so both consoles are using the same executable build. This helps avoid situations where two different regional or modified game versions behave differently online. And so my key takeaway here is that there has been a number of these type of services that's popped up in the past. Obviously, these are very hard to get going because you're going to need lots of players. So anyways, if you do check this out, just be prepared to search and find 0 players, and then, you might be just happy if you can find one person. Prospero Manager is an all-in-one PS5 management dashboard from Major. The payload runs on the console and serves the interface to the computer, tablet, or phone on the same network. The new public beta gives people their first package build to try From one interface, you can browse files, work with archives, install packages, backup saves, and manage a payload library. There is also release tracking and support for creating auto-load sequences, which could be useful if you normally send the same group of payloads at the start of a session. The dashboard goes beyond file management with process information, temperatures, profiles, logs, and account tools. This is still a beta, but I like the direction. It puts several jobs that normally require separate applications into one interface. They can work on almost any device with a browser. Comment FPS is a lightweight frame rate overlay for PS4 and PS5 games running on a PlayStation 5. It reads the console's native video output counter instead of patching the rendering code inside each game. So version 1.0.0 is the first public stable release. You can run it as a standalone ELF or load it as an ETA-HEN plugin, and it automatically detects when the active game changes. The result is intentionally simple, a clean integer FPS counter fixed to the lower left corner of the screen. The developer is also testing safer auto-load behaviors with ETA-HEN. This is the part I would watch next because an overlay like this is the most useful when it can start quietly in the background without adding extra work every time you launch a game. PS4 Debug is a userland debugger that gives developers access to running processes, memory, and console information on a PlayStation 4. This fork now adds support for firmware 13.00. So the repository includes a new PS4 Debug 13.00 payload, along with the firmware offsets and the script used to reproduce the build. For most viewers, the practical takeaway is not that this suddenly creates a jailbreak for firmware 13.00, but it gives developers a familiar debugging payload that they can use once they already have the required userland environment on that firmware. So that's a good thing to keep in mind because tooling has to follow the newer firmware versions before the developers can properly inspect processes, test memory changes, and build other projects on top of them. The next two projects are designed to work together. AMPR Emu provides the runtime use for certain PS4 titles on PS5, while the AMPR Emu updater helps users select and store the emulator builds that work best for each game. AMPR Emu version 0.3.6.6 improves responsiveness with adaptive chunk sizing. It also moves to the PS5 payload SDK, adds automated builds, and includes a follow-up fix for event handling. The updater has reached version 2.0.5, and it can apply one version globally or override this selection for an individual game. It also verifies builds saved for offline use and fixes problems involving rest mode and unreliable overrides. The current AMPR Emu test release still has a known save-related crash, so this is one update where matching the right build to the right game remains important. OnionHEN is a all-in-one hen and toolbox built around the wider PS5 payload stack. This project briefly replaced its documentation with a closure notice, but the full README and the guides have now returned. So version 0.0.10 is still the newest tagged release. The actual update here is that the repository once again explains the project clearly and includes new screenshots of the home screen overlay in the toolbox. The documentation covers cheats, FTP, remote play controls, payload launching, fan settings, and other console tools. And so personally, I'm glad that they restored the project. I really didn't know why they deleted it, but I can see that people are pretty mean out in the community, so good for them for putting it back up. Obviously, ETA-HEN is still the official source, but hey, why not go ahead and just try something? So PIZZA-HEN is another packaged hen and toolbox experience. Version 2.0.0 focuses almost entirely on localization, so the interface now covers 31 locales, including the toolbox and user-facing text for components such as POR DS4, fan controls, selectors, and system notifications. The release notes are very specific about what did not change. The The runtime logic and the bundled elf files remain the same as the previous baseline. This is a language and accessibility release rather than a new exploit or compatibility update. And honestly, to me, that is fine. A homebrew tool that becomes much more approachable when people do not have to decode every setting in a second language, especially when those settings can affect payloads and other sorts of behavior. So we have seen Sonic ISO continue to improve LuaMD and LuaGB while also showing a new Nintendo 64 emulator that I believe is going to be called PSN 64. So with LuaMD, this handles Mega Drive and Genesis games, while LuaGB covers Game Boy and Game Boy Color. Recent changes make both menus render full screen in a 16:9 layout. The project also states that it has received more portable symbol lookup and a more flexible logging for development. The video on screen is the first PSN 64 beta preview. It shows Nintendo 64 software running through the same general PS5 homebrew environment with a game selection menu and the emulator operating on real hardware. So this is the item I am the most curious to test personally. The earlier Lua Core projects showed that this environment could become a home for several small emulators, so adding Nintendo 64 support would make that collection much more interesting. Simple PS5 Downloader is a small Windows application for downloading official PS5 game updates from Sony's server and assembling the individual pieces into one PKG file. The version 2 source release improves compatibility with Sony's CDN by forcing TLS 1.2 and HTTP 1.1. Downloads now stream directly to the disk rather than loading an entire piece into memory first. The tool also verifies Sony's published hashes and restricts accepted manifest and download host to PlayStation.net. What I like here is that the project stays focused. It's not trying to manage the entire console. You give it the update information, it downloads the official pieces, verifies them, and puts them into that final PKG file that you can put over on your PlayStation 5. PS5 date and time sync solves a very specific hardware problem. If a depleted or faulty CMS or RTC battery causes the console clock to reset after a complete shutdown, the standalone payload can set it up correctly again. It tries several public time sources, including Cloudflare, the NTP tool, and Google, and if the DNS is not working on the console, it can fall back to the numeric server addresses instead. The payload preserves the configured time zone, updates the clock, reads it back to verify the change, and then it exits. I thought this one was worth included because it's a good example of a small homebrew utility that fixes a real annoyance. You do not need a permanent background service or a full application installed on the home screen in order to do this. We also have another round of development from KytyPS5 and SharpEmu. So KytyPS5 has a new automated build that is dated August the 28th. The recent work touches RDNA2 buffer handling, rendering targets, shader instructions, asynchronous input and output, and fiber context. The games here are pretty much the same as last time, and then for SharpEmu is still based around version 0.0.3 release 3, with newer commits continuing on top of it. So development covers high-level guest export, thread local storage, memory behavior, shaders, AGC, and video support. Demon's Souls Remake and Dead Cell remain the games being tested and worked on, so neither project is at the point where I think it would be any sort of a replacement for the PlayStation 5. The work is going to be slow on these emulators, but again, it's good to see that both projects are continuing to move. So here is the latest game roundup for PlayStation Jailbroken users on the PS5. The newest listings include Memory Off, Ghost Song, SpongeBob SquarePants, Titans of the Tide, Overcooked, All You Can Eat, Deliver at All Cost, which is a game I totally think you should check out, Rugby 25, and Lego Brawls. The PS4 side continues with Dark Reflection, Blood Omen, Medieval, and a few more. So the complete titles and cover arts are on screen. So again, pause here if you want to look closer at the full list. And so just to wrap things up here today, I will tell you that I am going to be taking a look immediately at the Redis automatic jailbreak for the PlayStation 5 on firmware 3.00 all the way through 5.50. So I might have another video dropping on the channel soon. So anyways, out of everything covered today, which project should I test first? The Redis Auto-Jailbreak, like I just mentioned, Prospero Manager, Common, FPS, or PSN64. Leave your pick in the comments. And again, if you enjoyed the episode, please leave a like and subscribe for more PlayStation Homebrew news. Thanks again for watching, and I'll see you in the next one. Michael, out!